Good afternoon, everybody. Greetings from Brussels and welcome to this week's Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. The war in Ukraine has dominated the headlines over the last 9 months, and it's tended to sort of move to the sideline. An issue which probably otherwise would have got a lot more attention, which is the return of major waves of illegal migration into Europe. Some of you who are of my generation will remember the great crisis of 2015, when over 1 million illegal migrants entered Europe, mainly across the Mediterranean. Germany took nearly 1 million of the number, but this wave of migration at the time was associated with the rise of populism and indeed a political crisis in the European Union. Well, we're not back there yet, but nonetheless, as COVID has receded and as people have started to move again, illegal migration into Europe has been ticking back up. So far, the UK this year has noted 40,000 illegal migrants crossing the English Channel, the highest number ever. Italy has taken in 90,000, and the EU has noted 135,000 illegal migrants heading into Southeast Europe across the Balkans. And as the numbers have gone up, predictably, disputes among EU members as to how to deal with migration have come back as well. Just a couple of weeks ago, France and Italy had a spat over the fate of a ship, the Ocean Viking, containing 234 migrants, which was trying to dock in Italy, but the new nationalist government in Rome of Giorgia Meloni was having none of that, and eventually the French had to allow the migrants to disembark at Toulon. But this caused lots of bad blood between Paris and Rome, who had been trying to patch up their previous disputes over migrants crossing from Italy into France. Indeed, the French presidency just a few months back managed to broker a so-called temporary mechanism agreement within the EU, whereby 12 countries agreed together to take a quota of 8,000 migrants, 3,000 of them in France and 3,000 in Italy. But after the Ocean Viking incident, the French Interior Minister immediately said that France was going to suspend that agreement and close its frontier with Italy, at least as far as migrants are concerned. So this means that we now need, once again, to look at the reasons why the EU so far, despite many attempts by interior ministers, has not been able to agree on a pact on migration. Well, what can be done before this wave probably recedes during the winter months, although, of course, the illegal migrants across the Mediterranean during those winter months could be replaced by millions more Ukrainians heading out of the country as the energy crunch in that country, subsequent to Putin's attacks on critical infrastructure, really starts to bite. But what can the EU do? Well, the first thing is that we need a new policy for the Mediterranean, where we have a resumption of the EU maritime patrols, such as Operation Sophia, that existed until recently, policing the Mediterranean, where 2,000 illegal migrants have so far drowned this year, but also working more cooperatively with those NGO humanitarian vessels, which often pick up the migrants in the first place. The NGOs accuse the governments of turning a blind eye, and the governments accuse the NGOs of encouraging illegal migration by being there to pick them up and deliver them safely to French, Spanish or Italian ports. The International Maritime Association has offered to broker some kind of deal between governments and the NGO ships, and we badly need, therefore, a more consolidated Mediterranean migrant handling system. The second thing is to revise the so-called Dublin Agreement within the EU, which provides that the country where the migrant first arrives has to process his or her asylum claim. This has led to a terrible asylum claim backlog in places like Greece or Italy, in France, often dragging on for years. So we need to accelerate the asylum procedure and also allow migrants to claim asylum in the country where they eventually end up, because the country where they arrive, such as Greece, is often not the country where they want to stay, but purely a transit point on a longer journey towards Germany or towards the UK or Sweden or Northern Europe. In third place, we need a policy on returns. The EU has said for some time now that migrants who cannot justifiably claim political asylum should be returned to their home countries, but only a trickle have been effectively returned back because of disputes in courts over whether they can be returned to countries facing armed conflict or potential human rights abuses. We need, therefore, a more streamlined procedure and a better sense of to which countries illegal migrants can safely be returned. We need also to help those countries in Africa and the Middle East to do a better job of stopping illegal migrants leaving in the first place. The EU, for example, has been working with the Libyan Coast Guard on improving its ability to detect the smuggling rings transporting migrants illegally across the Mediterranean. But the Libyan Coast Guard has also been accused of corruption and egregious human rights abuses. So a much better approach to that is required as well. The EU also needs to help Africa to deal with migrants. 80% of all migrants in Africa actually stay in Africa. They don't cross to Europe, but to the extent that they spend years in squalid refugee camps without being processed or offered a better future, the greater chance there is that eventually those 80% will also try to seek a better life in Europe. We need to pay more attention to the creation of jobs and employment in Africa so that migrants don't feel the need to leave in the first place. And the EU needs to do a better job of its assessment needs, because actually we need migrants, and migration is a fact of life. Even in my country, the United Kingdom, over 1 million migrants arrived legally in the UK last year, far more than the 40,000 illegal ones crossing the channel. And in many respects, those migrants are welcomed with open arms because they provide vital skills in the health service, in agriculture, in transportation, and so forward. So a more consolidated view of the EU's needs for migration and a better processing system would work better, particularly for making it clearer to migrants in their home countries before they even leave, if they have a reasonable chance of being able to legally access Europe or not. None of this, of course, is easy. The solution often consists in building fences, as Poland is now doing on its border with Belarus, or Finland is now doing on its border with Russia, as Hungary has done in the past. The EU certainly does not want countries like Belarus to weaponize migrants by pushing them across borders to destabilize EU countries, and the EU has expanded its Frontex force in order to be able to respond better to that kind of challenge. But a pact on migration is urgently needed so that the burden of the quotas of migrants is better shared across the Union. The burden should not just fall on certain Mediterranean countries overwhelmingly. And before next summer's migrant waves get into the boats to head across the Mediterranean, that pact on migration has finally got to be agreed by the European Union. Thank you for watching today. Always a pleasure. Look forward to seeing you, listening, hopefully to me again next week. Bye for now.